Hello, Tom. Nice to see you again.
Hey there, Matt. It's great to see
Thanks
you,
for
and thanks
joining me
for
because
coming.
I understand, obviously, it's not, so it's 2 p.m. here, but
Yeah,
so where are you based and what time is it there?
so I'm in Century City here in Los Angeles, so it's just currently 4 minutes past 6. But we work with clients all across the globe, Matt. So I'm pretty used to these early starts, so nothing new for me.
Yeah, I appreciate you getting up and looking so smart for us here in the UK.
All right.
Um,
No problem.
so we've been talking for a number of years now and talking about the various challenges that both of us see within law firms, not just across the UK but globally as well. And obviously, whenever we've had conversations, you've drawn on your experience operating within top 10 law firms in Ireland, Matheson's and McCann, firms McCann Fitzgerald. So to start off with, we'll come to the kind of the subject around AI and delve into kind of the digital services and how to create revenue generating services. But just to start off with, from working with law firms and interacting with law firms across the globe, where do you think they are at the moment on this digital transformation journey? Certainly, we've made progress, compared to 10, 15 years ago. But how are things going in kind of moving that journey forward?
Yeah, and I think there's a spectrum of sophistication, I think, Matt, in terms of law firms and where they are in their journey when it comes to digital transformation. I think it kind of falls into three buckets, really. The first is you have law firms that are at the beginning of their journey that haven't sort of made any meaningful progress with regards to, digital transformations, investing in the people, the process, or the technology in order to do so. So that's kind of one cohort, obviously. The second is sort of, these firms that have made some progress, in terms of their digital transformation agenda and maybe perhaps have sort of, hired in a change transformation director or implemented legal tech and innovation function. I think those firms are sort of, halfway along their journey in terms of making some inroads into asking themselves the question, how are we going to use these digital technologies to, I guess, transform, our client facing services, what that looks like. And then internally, how are we going to use these digital technologies to make ourselves more efficient, to enhance productivity? And then from an innovation standpoint, how are we going to use these digital technologies to create new digital products and services that our clients may need moving forward? So I think that's kind of the second cohort, those firms that have made some progress. And then I think you have these cohort of firms, particularly large firms, that have made significant progress, in their digital transformation journey. And these are firms who, have invested in, for example, setting up a centralized legal technology and innovation function. They have the people, they have the processes in place, they have the technology. I think that they've made sort of, significant progress in terms of digital transformation. We see that, particularly with the large US and UK firms. So for me, that's kind of how I see it, Matt, in terms of falling into those three buckets.
So some have been focused or maybe achieved some gains in terms of increase in internal operational efficiency through technology. Some
Mm.
have started or done well in improving the client experience when it comes to digital engagement. And
Mm.
then, it's interesting because I separate when I have conversations with law firms, I separate transformation into those two buckets. But actually, then you've added the bucket, which is really interesting around innovation as well,
Mm.
in terms of okay, this is the BAU stuff, and
Yeah.
firms are along their journey to different levels at the moment in that BAU stuff. But then there's got this innovation bucket in
Yeah.
terms of actually trying to stand out, differentiate, wow your clients through using technology in a more creative way.
Yeah.
So firms are along this journey to different levels. So what challenges are they facing
Mm.
in kind of enhancing their standing in these three buckets and also the kind of the structural side as well?
Yeah, sure. I think, structure is something that I definitely see is a challenge for many firms, still. So, like typically, if you take, for example, that first bucket of firms that have, just at the very beginning of their journey and thinking about digital transformation in those areas that we talked about, I think it's not, as you mentioned in your intro, it's not just about buying technology and throwing technology at a problem. It's about people, process, and technology. And so when we're working with firms, quite often, we're working with the managing partner, the equity partners, or, at executive committee level. And I think that it's really important to sort of, from a structural standpoint, really carefully and consider in a considered way, think about how is the firm combining people, process, and technology in order to enable transformation. And I think what I see quite often, Matt, is particularly at those firms at the beginning of their journey, or those firms who have made some progress in this space, is that they either have no capabilities in-house, right, or perhaps they have some capabilities, but those capabilities are decentralized, right? So you may have sort of tech people, like for example in IT, looking at innovation, or perhaps managing client portals or data rooms. You may have in a litigation practice, an e-discovery team attached to the litigation practice, sort of doing e-discovery investigations in your data subject access requests. In the transactional side of the house, you may have technologists or project managers working with the corporate team on, for example, due diligence projects that are trying to progress a project management agenda. And then you have this sort of decentralized capabilities. And a lot of the work that I've done over the last number of 3 years since we set up this business is actually sort of taking that organizational wide view of digital transformation, sitting down with senior leadership and saying, we really need to consider how we actually structure this, because at the moment, we have decentralized capabilities and we have people operating in silos, moving in different directions. And in my experience, Matt, it's very difficult for a firm to actually make meaningful progress in a single direction, right, in terms of its vision for digital transformation. So quite often, there is that exercise in really sort of thinking about, we need to take a holistic view of this organization-wide. We need to get our people, our processes, and technology in order. And quite often, what I've seen from the projects that we've completed is that when that's done in a centralized way, right? So you see a lot of firms have, a legal tech and innovation function, right, that sits alongside IT, that then collaborates with, say, for example, knowledge. And I think having that sort of, centralized structure, with people, the processes, and technology sort of managed in a centralized way and reported to sort of senior management at a law firm, that is a game changer in terms of, it enables the firm to actually make meaningful progress. And it actually opens up those digital capabilities, whether they're client facing, internally facing, or, perhaps something new in innovation. It's about opening that up to the entire firm. And you can only actually do that if you have a proper centralized structure in place to actually lead your transformation. So I think, and that's not an easy challenge to solve. There's no quick fix for that, in terms of going from a decentralized model to a centralized model. So that's definitely one of the challenges that we see with firms, and one of the challenges that we help firms solve. So that's one. I think the second one is around generative AI. So I guess this has obviously been the legal, I guess the big star in the legal tech space in the last 2 years. And then you have firms in all of those 3 buckets asking themselves the question, what are we going to do about generative AI? And how are we going to leverage it, right? And then you have the firms at the beginning of their journey, that may just have a traditional IT department, right? Which is kind of, quite more often than not, nuts and bolts, right? And it's sort of, keeping the lights on at firms. And they're now being asked the question, well, how are we going to use generative AI to make ourselves more efficient, to enhance productivity? Then the more advanced firms saying, well, could we potentially incorporate these generative AI solutions into client-facing digital services? How do you go about that? And again, I think there is that kind of spectrum of sophistication when it comes to generative AI. What I've seen in the firms that we've worked with, are taking a really, again, that organization-wide approach, and not just sort of, launching into a Copilot pilot, launching into a Harvey pilot, launching into some other generative AI provider. I think it's really important to actually set the foundations, put that sort of foundational structure in place. And actually then, once you've done that, looking at, the different generative AI platforms, right? Understanding what your processes are, understanding what your use cases are for that technology across the different practice areas in the firm and also in the business services team. And then identifying those sort of use cases where that type of technology can actually, deliver efficiency, enhance productivity or capacity for a firm, and then actually assessing, which platform is right for us based on our needs. And I think that, very different to, some firms that kind of just sort of go with Copilot or go with Harvey and say, we're going with this tech because another firm did. And I think that, by actually identifying your use cases and then assessing critically, which of these generative AI technologies best suits our needs. And again, taking that view, Matt, of, this is something that we need to centralize and give access to, all of the lawyers in the practice areas and all of, the business service professionals and business service teams.
So, I mean, we're pointing towards the challenges of moving forward. So, with some are structural, some are no matter how mature the firms are and how large they are, still getting distracted by technology and trying to run before they can walk. I mean, this session is around, we're talking about AI and digital services, but really, whatever the technology name or whatever the technology type, the structure and the processes that need to be put in place to be able to identify use cases and implement technology effectively are the same no matter what the tech is. I mean, I regularly give talks around AI, stating that it's going to be the most boring AI talk ever for the audience, because really I just waffle on around the importance of business analysis and the building business cases, having effective testing and change management and so on. So the challenges that you feel that are stopping people from moving forward primarily, it's structural, and because of that, those structures aren't necessarily in place, they then get drawn into this. Oh, let's accelerate by buying a piece of tech and then be disappointed with the results that it comes from. So it's still that structural piece and that process piece. So at the moment, you're saying that quite often law firms have this all decentralized. So rather than centralized, also is there maybe in a lot of law firms the lack of the right skills as well, centralized or decentralized? They don't necessarily have the right skills in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And they may not, and some firms will elect to, partner with an alternative legal service provider, perhaps, sort of, bring in that multidisciplinary talent. But we definitely do see that. And I think, one of the key things that enables firms to take advantage of, these technologies like generative AI or, other digital technologies is transitioning to this model from sort of, single disciplinary, where you have lawyers, just all lawyers together working on a problem to solve problems for clients, to actually transitioning to, a multidisciplinary model whereby you have lawyers, project managers, technologists, business analysts, like you mentioned, right? And bringing that multidisciplinary, skills to bear to helping solve problems for clients. Because what I'm seeing in my conversations, Matt, with general counsel at large organizations, is that they're increasingly coming to their panel of service law firms with problems that are not just purely legal in nature. They require perhaps, some e-discovery tools. They require sort of a client portal and maybe a data room. Technology is something that is now, I think it's really important that it's integrated into how firms deliver their services to clients. And in order to do that effectively, you have to have multidisciplinary teams working together, so lawyers, project managers, technologists.
Yeah, and so we're connecting the dots here in the fact that structurally, law firms are maybe not set up to be able to innovate and optimize and deliver use these digital tools and deliver digital services effectively. We've got the client desiring these and desiring this kind of level of engagement, and just desiring, it's really interesting what you're saying there, desiring support and advice that isn't necessarily traditional legal work. So it's around tooling, it's around that technical piece. And I've seen, I've spoke to firms where their innovation, when done effectively, wins them business because, the technical innovation, complementing their legal work really helps them stand out and serves a broader need within the client. So we've got the need of the client, and then we've got our structural challenges. And you're pointing towards the fact that the team now to deliver these services is a lot broader, business analysis and whatever it may be. But I'm guessing, but this leads to a bit of a challenge. And are you seeing a bit of a challenge when it comes to billing and charging for these services? So we're talking about, yes, structurally it's a challenge. The clients want it. Do you see the challenge within law firms in terms of, right, okay, now suddenly we're building this large team, very disparate skills, and then we've got to somehow funnel it into a billable hour structure that from a lawyer and a legal exec point of view. So does that create a challenge that this broad team all needed to contribute to deliver services to the client?
Yeah, absolutely. We see that quite a lot. And a lot of the work that I do when we're doing transformation for law firms is we work quite closely, with the director of finance as well as the managing partner, right, to really obviously consider, the transformation from a financial perspective, right? And I think, when it comes to that whole area of, well, we know that clients are wanting technology-enabled legal services. We know that, right? And firms are kind of, sort of waiting for that and saying we have to have, for example, client portals, we have to have, data room services, we have to have, various different digital services that support core legal advisory service, right? And so from a financial management perspective, the question then becomes, well, that requires an investment, right? And in my experience, working with managing partners and in particular equity partners, when you are, for example, doing an assessment and presenting findings and recommendations to a board of equity partners, they generally get the need that they need to do something in this space, and that an investment in this space is worthwhile. But at the same time, they will want to see some type of tangible return on investment, whether that return on investment is, well, you can actually justify it by it's making ourselves more efficient, it's enabling our associates to be more productive, it's increased capacity, right? So cost savings. And then there's the other side of it of, well, is there any possibility that perhaps some of our client-facing tech services or digital services could be revenue generating, right? And so that's sort of the two angles. When we talk about, monetizing innovation or monetizing digital services, there are two ways that you can do that. One, the first way is by, making yourself more efficient, enhance productivity and capacity. And the second is, by having a portfolio of digital services that support your core legal advisory services that generate revenue. And typically, when I'm working with firms, what I tend to see happen, at board level and with sort of, finance directors is, once there's an acceptance that there needs to be an investment in this space, they'll look at three different models. One, is this a cost model? The firm will say, look, this is purely a cost to our business. We just have to make this investment in the people, the process, and the technology, or we're going to absorb that cost, in the interest of having tech-enabled legal service delivery. And that's the first option. The second is, a recovery model where the firm will say, well, okay, we're happy to make the investment as per, we've set out in our plan. But when it comes to client-facing tech services, right, we're going to try and get to a point where we would get them to at least pay for themselves, right? And again, it depends on what type of digital services you're offering to your clients. But you will see equity partners at firms that have that hat on and say, well, look, if we can get our digital services to wash their face effectively, right, we'll be happy with that. We don't see it as a revenue generator, but as a profit center. But at the same time, we don't want it to become a black hole with runaway costs, right? And you quite often see equity partners have that sort of elect to pursue a cost recovery model. And then you have sort of even more advanced firms who actually view this whole area as a business opportunity, right? And they want to have it as a profit center. And you see that, and quite often you see them referred to as, captive alternative legal service providers, where they'll have, what we call a full stack portfolio of digital services, where they'll provide e-discovery services, investigation services, this client, particularly in Europe, data subject access requests, compliance, company secretarial services. Some of the more advanced firms now have legal operations consulting as part of their digital client-facing services that generate revenue. And they're viewing this very much as a profit center, and run it very much like a business. So, in my experience, when we are building these legal tech and innovation functions or digital services functions for law firms, they're typically the three ways that firms will go about it. It's either a cost center, you recover your costs, or you view it as a profit center.
There's so much to unpack here. I love this. So because I'm used to living in a world where law firms, IT departments, we talk about IT, the traditional IT, and now digital. They've got a budget set there's a percentage and it's set and that's it. And they're constantly fighting for more. And if you think about from an IT point of view, the ever increasing cost of cyber security. We've got obviously tools, spread across the firm, and it is, for most firms, it is seen as a cost. There's no doubt about that. And IT directors, transformation directors, whatever the title may be, they're constantly trying to request more budget, from the financial controller, but it's seen as a cost. You're just turning that on its head, in the fact that that should be a light bulb moment for most law firms and most kind of technical leaders, because that you should be looking at it in the way of, no, this done properly. This is a revenue generator, and if we think about where we're at in terms of the rise of AI, we're already seeing law firms be asked by their clients as to at what point the AI discount is going to kick in terms of, right, okay, well, I know that the technology is being developed to be able to do some discovery or summarization or whatever it may be through technology. So therefore, I want your billable hour to reflect that. And that's a real challenge. And I've spoke to tech leaders within law firms where their partners are actually a little bit reticent of implementing technology because they feel that it's going to reduce their legal exec billable hour. So turning that on the head and actually stepping into it and embracing it as a revenue generator just suddenly, makes that look very, very, very different. So, that should be huge for people to start thinking about. So if we think about, actually, you're talking about a bill going out to clients, and whereas it traditionally may have, and once again, let's think about this decentralized firm where you've got technology, supporting each department, but supporting them but still doing their work in a very traditional way. We've got bills going out to clients where we've got legal work billed at X amount per hour, and we've got legal exec work billed at X amount an hour. You're talking about creating a situation where, in addition to that, we've got digital services being, whether it be hourly or whether it be productized, sitting on that client-facing bill. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I think just to kind of step back from that for a second, when you think about generative AI, the conceptual technology, and then the business model of law firms with the billable hour, the two are completely at odds with each other. That's the elephant in the room. And I when I'm talking to clients and talking to managing partners and equity partners at board level, this is the burning question. In terms of how does this technology fit into our existing business model of the billable hour? We hear firms talking about, well, do we introduce perhaps a technology charge, right? In the same way that they would have had admin charges previously, because, to invest in, enterprise-grade generative AI technology and roll it out, give access to everybody at the firm is a significant investment. So yeah, I think that firms are grappling with that question. But just to your point about that additional layer, right, of an invoice going out to a client, right? And this is actually, we've seen this play out already in the digital services groups and digital groups that we built for law firms, right? Is that where you have sort of decentralized, no digital services capabilities, right? It's very hard then to try and charge a client, right, for technology. They say, well, is that not part of the admin fee? And how is that adding value to me, right? Whereas at the firms that we have sort of led the transformation, they have quite often, they will end up with a digital services group or legal technology and innovation group. And within that group, there are fee earners, technologists, project managers, right? And we just view it as sort of another practice area that is working collaboratively with litigation, with corporate, with technology, with tax, right? And they are fee earners, right? And it's the law firm working together in a multidisciplinary way to deliver those services to clients. And so when you think about the invoice where you have a centralized legal tech and innovation function, right? You have your invoice to the client is legal services, sort of the first section, and here's all the time that we've billed various associates in different practice areas. But if you have a centralized digital services department, you then have a second item, which is digital services. And then underneath that, it is, project manager at X number of hours, a legal technologist at X number of hours. And if there are any specific technology or data hosting costs, they are then itemized on the invoice as well. And that actually positions the invoice to the client as, well, yes, you're getting our expert legal advisory services, but our digital services team, both the people and the technology were used on this, right? And if you are able to articulate, the immense value that they're providing and the cost savings that they're providing, in my experience and sort of working with law firms, is that having that integrated approach on your invoice, legal services, digital services, and in my experience, as I headed up a digital services department with 23 people for over 4 years, that transition from just simply a legal services invoice to an invoice that is legal services and digital services in an integrated way is something that clients are more open to.
Yeah, so for the brilliant. I mean, so for the firms, the firms that are concerned about technology, AI, whatever it may be, reducing the amount of billable hours that they're putting out there, what actually happens is, there's more billable hours, but positioned in a different department. Maybe that billable hour has greater margin in it as well. So you're delivering a more competitively priced service to the client. So they benefit. They benefit potentially from speed and quality and whatever else that maybe technology brings. But also as well, you're working in a more efficient manner and quite possibly a more profitable manner. So, and then you've got this department that can separately go out and you pointed towards it earlier, seek to get business themselves. Maybe that's not part of that doesn't fit in with the normal areas of law that the firm normally kind of operate within. So potentially supporting in-house law firms or corporates, bringing that technology and that skill set to them. So superb. So, and when you go into work with, where should law firms start? I mean, when you go in and work with law firms and you do this transformation piece for them, I love the fact that when we spoke before, you have called yourself in the past an intrapreneur when you operated within law firms. So when you go in, you're trying to give them that mindset, as well as it's not just IT, it's kind of you're trying to be intrapreneurial. Where do you start when you go into law firms? Because from that, the people that are watching this will maybe think about where they could start. So where do you start?
Yeah, so typically our starting point is, we'll be sort of sitting down with, it differs from firm to firm, but the managing partner, for example, I think, to do something meaningful in the context of transformation at a law firm, it really has to be led by the top. If you have managing partner involvement from the get-go, you're going to move quicker, you're going to get buy-in quicker, roadblocks are going to be moved quicker. And then also, the IT director is also very important in helping sort of, make this bridge across to sort of, the new frontier of digital services or having a legal tech and innovation function. And typically what we do quite often, Matt, is what we recommend that, if firms have, say, no capabilities, what we'll do is, a legal tech and innovation maturity assessment, right? And that process takes about, say, 3 months. Typically what we do is we sort of sit down with, the equity partners, the managing partner, the director of IT. We form a small working group, and we sort of set out the scope of, understanding what it is, understanding the firm's, business strategy, understanding what it is that they want to achieve in terms of their investment in digital or technology or legal tech. And then what we do is we then sort of insist on sort of conducting stakeholder interviews, right? With partners from all the key practice areas across the organization, and then the leaders from the business service function teams, right? And what I'm doing there is getting a deep understanding of the type of legal advisory work that a firm is actually doing, right? In those practice areas, right? To get a really good understanding of the firm. To then also understand, well, how do the business service teams support that firm, right? I think those stakeholder interviews internally really give you a sense of what is the current state of play here at the firm. And so we collect all that data, we step back, we then ask the client, we say, well, look, can you give us between 3 and 5 of your client contacts, GCs from different industry sectors, and let us collect their feedback on the firm in terms of what they would like to see, right? What are their pain points in terms of service delivery? And then what we do, Matt, effectively is we sort of combine the feedback that we get internally, right, from all the sort of senior partners in the different practice areas, we combine that with the client, and then we sort of aggregate it out, sit back down with senior management and say, look, here's the current state. Here's what your people internally are saying, and here's what your clients want. Because I think there's a huge part of this that needs to be client-centric. If you're making your investment, it has to benefit the client. So it's really important to involve them, at the beginning of the process. And that process, then we compile that into a report, sort of a long-form report that sort of, sets out all of sort of key areas in terms of the background, the findings, the recommendations, the transcripts and stakeholder interviews. And then we have sort of a summary presentation as well, where we'll then go and sit down with the management committee, right, and summarize the report, right, and say, look, here's the background, here's the current state, here's where we as a working group would like to get to in terms of a future state. Here's how much it's going to cost. Here's what sort of, the implementation looks like. Here's what sort of the launch looks like. This is how long it's going to take. And we then sort of go through that process, the maturity assessment, usually takes about 3 months. And it then puts the firm in a position where they're able to step back from it. They have an organizational wide view of, how they're actually going to tackle this transformation. What are the benefits to the firm? What are the benefits to our clients? And we give them the optionality around, here are your options. You could do option A, option B, option C, right? And again, it's all based, Matt, on the type of work that the firm is doing, because you can only actually figure out what your digital services are if you really deeply understand, what your core legal advisory services are, right? And that then gives the firm a position at the end of phase one, that we call it, well, we understand the current stage, we understand what our options are, and we're going to choose option A, B, or C. And then typically from there, we then move into sort of implementation. We work collaboratively with the firm to actually implement whatever has been agreed by the executive committee. And so, for example, quite often, some firms will look at, well, we actually need to have a centralized digital services group, or we need to have a legal tech and innovation function to sort of, spearhead this transformation. And then there will be a launch involved, typically, of this new legal tech and innovation function at the firm. And we support our clients, from that sort of day one, phase one, right through to sort of phase 4 launch, such that the firm is sort of set up for success in terms of how it's structured, with its people, its process, its technology, and set them up, I guess, lay the foundation for digital success and transformation success moving forward.
I love that, Tom, and it really fits with the whole purpose of this series of conversations that I'm having, in terms of trying to help law firms think about, once again, we draw on that digital transformation pyramid that you can find on the Transform Legal page, but thinking top down from business strategy, and the client, who are your client? How do they want to be served? Down into that operating model, right? Okay, do we have the operating model to be able to serve this effectively? And business analysis and the people element is an absolute key part of that. Before we get to this technical layer, it's what you've conveyed there is exactly the whole purpose of having these conversations, starting with that analysis and then creating a strategy off the back of that. So, and when we're talking, it's still very people driven. I mean. So the big differentiator that I've found over recent years, working with mid-tier law firms, large mid-tier law firms, is the difference that I find in terms of how far they're along their digital transformation journey. Where it is one of the key indicators as to how far along they're going to be is the type of people they have in place. And one of the key elements is whether they have a business analyst. We see so many firms that don't have business analysts, and because of that, they're kind of floundering to identify where to start and what the priorities are and what the client's needs are, and so on and so forth. And you've kind of cemented a similar kind of message in the fact that it's that analysis at the start that's absolutely crucial, and then building out the team, and so it's the people bit all the way through that, in terms of how to get things moving forward. So when you get, from a people point of view, what kind of skills are you looking for to head these teams, these groups, and within these law firms?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Matt. And we've sort of overcome that challenge 3 times in the last 6 months for clients, in terms of what we build for them. We then sort of go and source head of legal tech and innovation, or head of digital, or whatever the case may be. And I guess what we're looking for in short, and we could talk about this for an entire hour in terms of what constitutes a good head of digital at a mid-sized law firm, is it's really a combination of, they must have, a very good understanding of both the practice and business of law. And I'll stop short of saying that they need to be a qualified solicitor, because in my view they don't. But they, if you think about IT and then the practice areas at a law firm, these legal tech and innovation functions and digital services functions really kind of help bridge the gap. That's what this person's got to do. You've got to bridge the gap between the lawyers and technology. So in order to do that, you have to understand what it is that the lawyers are trying to achieve, right? And that's sort of critical for me in terms of the really good understanding of what the lawyers are trying to achieve. You've got to speak their language. And quite often IT won't speak their language, and that's where you connect. So for me, a very good understanding at a minimum the business and practice of law is critical. Second piece is around obviously their technical expertise, right? So again, your job is to bridge the gap between lawyers and technology, right? And then you have to be, very proficient at tech. And the one thing is that it's a broad church, right? 20 years ago, the only sort of, when you think about client-facing tech at a law firm, perhaps was, e-discovery manager, right? And you're using technology in the course of in the course of a review to assist with, reviewing documents, and that was it. But you think about today, it's a much broader church. You've got, transaction management, you've got AI contract review, you've got client portals, you've still got your discovery and investigations, you've got the whole new world of generative AI. So I think, that person really needs to have, a broad expertise across the spectrum of legal tech, and not just, e-discovery, or not just, transaction management. You really need to be sort of across the board in terms of your depth and breadth of expertise in legal tech. So that's the second one. And the third one is, for me, that business expertise, that sort of entrepreneurial acumen, right? Because, depending on how the firm views their legal tech or digital services function, right, you are sort of, running a business unit for them if it is revenue generating or viewed as a business. So you have to have that business hat on, because quite often, that individual will be, for example, pricing digital services, right? When working, alongside the lawyers, they will be invited to pitch into pitch meetings, right? And come along to a client and say, well, and now the head of legal tech and innovation is going to talk to you about, what our digital services are and how they can help, us deliver our services to you and help you solve your problems. So you're going to be in pitch meetings. You're working with all stakeholders across the firm, the director of finance, marketing, business development, right? You really have to have a strong business acumen. So I guess to conclude, it's really those three things, good legal knowledge, understanding the business and practice of law, strong technical expertise across the spectrum of legal tech, and really good, strong business acumen.
And because of that broad spectrum of skills that you've just painted there, I honestly feel that most law firms, when they're trying to kickstart that journey, need fractional support. They need external support. What I will say is, from the conversations that we've had previously, I think what you're doing within the sector, I don't see any. I just think that it's fantastic, and I don't see anybody else doing what you're doing from a transformational point of view. The work that you're putting into law firms, and it's out of those skills that you've pinpointed there, that entrepreneurial mindset, that commercial mindset is probably the element that's most difficult to get alongside the technical acumen. Those two things, I mean, that's the aim for a lot of law firms in kind of transformational leads, but it's really difficult to find. And the conversation we've had previously, where you've mapped out actually how you go into clients and do a revenue forecast as part of, in an ideal scenario of actually creating revenue out of the technology that's implemented. I mean, it must be a game changer for law firms, and the financial minds in those law firms when they see that. Conscious of bringing things towards an end, just to close things off, are you able to give, in terms of people that are joined this conversation today, what's the one bit of advice in terms of where they should start? So, where should they focus first?
Yeah, I think the kind of key takeaway for me, key message, I guess, to people is, it can be as a law firm at leadership level, you think about the business strategy of the firm, right? That's where people's minds are focused, right? And it's very easy to think, well, our business strategy is about getting more core legal advisory work, right, at sort of the hourly rates, and that's perfectly fine, and that's the majority of law firm strategies the world over, right? And I think that it can be easy to look at legal tech and innovation, digital services, digital transformation, and it can be sometimes a bit too easy to think, well, in 2025, that's not going to be our strategic focus, because our strategic focus is getting more core legal advisory work, right, which is higher margin work. And I think it's easy to forget about that. And so what I would say to people is, when you're looking at your business strategy for your law firm, for 2025 and beyond, right, it's imperative that you sort of input digital on that agenda and make digital part of your business strategy in 2025 and beyond, because I think there are going to be some fantastic opportunities, for law firms, right, in the digital space, in the years ahead that perhaps didn't exist previously, right? But there are also some threats, in terms of, particularly in the context of generative AI. I'll give you an example, Matt. I spoke to the general counsel of one of the very large tech companies in Palo Alto this week while I was attending a conference. And she sort of said to me, we're actually using generative AI ourselves, right? And we are looking to our panel service law firms and asking them, hey, what are you guys doing from a digital and innovation perspective? Are you using generative AI on your tasks? Are you doing it? Are you using it to perhaps, create a summary memo, right? So that we can get that advice faster and make business decisions quicker, right? And so I think you have a lot of clients who are going to very soon be looking at law firms and saying, well, what digital capabilities do they have? But I think, there are opportunities in this space for sure. There are threats in this space. So my key takeaway for people today, Matt, would be to make sure that sort of digital services or legal tech and innovation is part of your core business strategy 2025 and beyond.
Brilliant. Superb, Tom. I mean, from my point of view, the key takeaways are the structure needs to be right. And I love the fact that we're talking about centralizing the expertise, which is the first step. And then what that can lead to is a revenue generating team. And I've had a conversation with an IT director recently that may well be on the session today. And it was a light bulb moment when we started to talk about not kind of going to the FD cap in hand to ask for more budget, but actually thinking about, right, I'm going to create you revenue, and I'm going to create not a cost center, but a revenue generating center. And if to see people for people to see that in action, where you were the head of digital services for a number of years, Matheson in Ireland, please go to their website and you can see this is a digital services division that actually generates revenue, and this is how you help law firms. It's happening now in the UK, Ireland, and the US. Absolutely superb.
Just to add to that, Matt, we've just completed a transformation at William Fry. And again, at William Fry Digital was the build there on their website. And so we also have a case study from that transformation with sort of, feedback from the managing partner and the director of IT. And if anybody on today's call would like a copy of that, I'm sure we would be very happy to send it to them and very welcome a conversation.
Yeah, and for those that are listening or watching live, we've had questions, but we haven't got time to go to them today. But what we'll do is we'll follow them up. Myself and Tom will follow them up, and I'll also distribute the case study that Tom mentioned there as part of the follow up to today's session. And for those that are listening to this recorded or watching this recorded, please reach out, and I can forward that on. Brilliant. Thanks so much, Tom. Absolute pleasure. You got me more and more excited as the conversation went on, especially because I'm very commercially minded. And when people talk about revenue generation rather than cost, you always get my thumbs up. Brilliant. So looking forward to what's coming from NEKN. We've got for a start, for those wanting to download our white paper that is on transformation within the legal industry, looking at the journey so far and what's coming next, go to our website and you can get that. But we've got an in-person event coming up on December the 4th, where I'm going to be talking with some guests around practical AI for law firms on behalf of Birmingham Law Society. I'm joined there by Carl Chapman of Kim Documents, who's going to be talking about the data that sits behind AI, in the fact that getting your data into the right shape is the only way to really drive forward AI innovation. And also joined by a partner of ours, Pax8, our Microsoft distributor. And we're going to join with Pax8 to talk about the Microsoft Copilot implementation process. And we're going to take the conversation to the next level, not just talk about it at the lower level of how to use it within 365, but talk about also, once again, from a data governance point of view, how Microsoft Purview is going to accelerate Copilot deployment, and also the other cool stuff that you can do interacting with third-party applications to really create custom Copilots and really start affecting your internal operations and maybe also client service delivery as well. So, yeah, brilliant. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to Tom. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Cheers.